Okay, can you hear me? Well, yes. So good morning, everybody. I'm Denis Dorval. I'm Vice President for EMEA at Fresco. That means basically I'm responsible for operations over the EMEA territory. I do have responsibility actually for APAC as well. And as you will see, operations in the field, right, from an open source company like Fresco means also basically I'm responsible for sales, right, because we do sell, and we will see how we do that. First of all, I would like to thank you, Bern, and the Open Expo to receive us here. Bern and Switzerland are a bit of a special place for Fresco because actually Switzerland has been one of the first countries in Europe to embrace and adopt Fresco as a product. We have had very early adopters of Fresco here, especially in the government space. We will see that a bit later on with the Swiss court, for example. The Tribunal Fédéral Suisse actually is a customer of Fresco, as well as the Canton de Vaud. I think someone from State of Vaud was presenting yesterday. As part of my presentation, I'm going, yes, to talk to you about Fresco, what the economic conditions, climate means for us, but for open source in general. And also, I will try to explain, give you further information as to how at Fresco we're leveraging the true value of the open source model to deliver rapid innovation in a cost control fashion in a specific market, ECM, Enterprise Content Management, that I will talk a bit about, right, that was kind of dying for some fresh approach, right, from software vendors. So I think if there was still any doubt back in fall in Europe that maybe recession was not really there, was just the US, etc. Looking at the news today, right, there's just no question that we are facing kind of tough, difficult economic climate and conditions these days, and businesses are badly hit, right, with a recession which tends now to spread globally. Well, as always, in these kind of difficult circumstances, there is always room for hope, right, and also an opportunity to change. And I mean, some might wonder about, well, what does have this to do with open source? Well, we do think that actually there is an interesting parallel to be made as to what happened to the economy over the last few months, especially to the financial sector, to what open source is actually bringing to the software and technology industry. Because if you look at what is considered being the main root causes for this really big recession we are now in the middle of, actually it goes back to a financial services sector that has been run through an overly complex and anything but transparent, right, actors, products, and services. It is now well accepted that the financial services sector has been overly complex, right, to understand. Even bankers were not understanding exactly what they were selling to their customers, right? And when you make a parallel with the IT technology software industry, you know, you can also draw lessons or parallels to this industry where actually overly complex products and lack of transparency has been, right, the day-to-day, you know, bread of the IT software industry over the last 20 years. So the interesting thing to note here is that some people have noticed that maybe there is something broken here, and that these times are the times of more transparency, more collaboration, and more openness. Actually, when you look at what Barack Obama is saying these days, it looks like an open source manifesto, right, applied to IT software and technology, which is quite, I think, interesting. So the good news is that yes, and we will see that during the presentation, open source allows us, Fresco and others, like the Ubuntu guys we've seen, you know, just before me, right, to deliver higher value through a much more transparent and fair, right, business model and process. So yes, Barak, we can, right, as you used to say. I'm just here illustrating a bit, you know, the history, very brief history of Fresco over the last 5 years. And when you look at this kind of numbers and traction we have had over those 5 years, you realize that this would have certainly not been possible applying a traditional software model. In less than 5 years, we have reached now 1.5 million downloads of the Fresco content management platform. We have up to about 75 now community members, people that help us developing the product, are users of the product, give us feedback as to whether our product fit their needs, right? And we will see how actually the openness of the open source development process allow us to be much closer to market fitness than a closed traditional software development process. We have about 50,000 plus live sites. By that I mean not systematically customers, but people that are using on a regular, right, basis, you know, Fresco for their content management. We have about 150 add-ons or applications that plug onto the Fresco content management platform. We're running a big, large network of partners, system integrators, etc. And we have users over 200 plus countries already. Although we just have offices in the UK and a virtual team somewhere in Europe and another virtual team in the US. And on top of that, we have managed over that period of time to capture 750 plus customers, and we will look at those customers. Interestingly enough, as my colleague from Ubuntu was highlighting, customers of open source are rather in the mid-size, large-size companies actually segment, which was kind of a surprise to me and to us in general, right? Because we thought it would rather be for the small companies, but we will see that why this is happening. Also, we have, through actually low-touch, internet-based, right, marketing awareness strategy, we have achieved great awareness around Fresco in our space, and we will also see later in the presentation why is that. And before I forgot, I mean, who knows Fresco as a product or content management platform in this room? That's pretty good. So who are users or regular users of Fresco? Okay, just 3. And who are customers of Fresco? Well, I still have some work then, right? That's good news. So now, I mean, just before drilling into the model we're leveraging and how we're working at Fresco and what we do, etc., I just want to highlight a bit what is maybe the most well-kept secret of open source, is that basically open source is being massively used in the Fortune 10,000 segment, right? This is just, you know, a sample of our customer base, and you will see that they're not using Fresco for some sort of departmental Mickey Mouse projects, but they're using Fresco for some real mission-critical, right, production environment of which their business depend on, right? And again, this is across the board, whether it is government institutions, financial services, manufacturing, telco, services. There's been some sort of a wake-up call over the last 12, 18 months that, you know, why aren't we just leveraging and using a good technology that has been proved by a large community at a much lower price point that we're currently using? Another interesting lesson is that when you're selling open source, your best prospects are the people that are savvy or knowledgeable around the product you sell already, because they have had experiences with traditional software already, right? And they have also seen the limitations of that model, especially recently. So first, how did we achieve such a great traction and growth over the last few years? I mean, there are several ingredients there. We happen to be on a market, ECM, Enterprise Content Management, which was kind of frustrated Frustrated because there was really a growing demand, while the existing players were not fulfilling and servicing that demand, right, up to the expectations of the market. Enterprise content management deals with basically the management of documents within a company or within a government institution. And by that, we refer to basically everything which is not kind of structured data, i.e. data that ends up being managed through a RDBMS, Relational Database Management System. So anything from email to a Word document, to PDF, right, to blogs, to web pages is referred to as unstructured content that needs to be managed, right? From whether it is indexing, searching, categorizing this content, applying security policies to this content, applying actually processes or workflows to this specific content. This is a set of features that ECM at large cover, right? And usually we make distinctions around document management a bit, typically indexing, authorization, categorizing of documents so that everybody can access the same document, right, through the appropriate process and security access policy. Web content management, all the features that are used to actually power the web from a website, community site perspective, managing the content that is then pushed towards actually a web infrastructure. And obviously, in the middle of that, there is collaboration, right? i.e. all the features around collaborating around creating content, right? Or leveraging an existing piece of content. Underneath that, you will see we are actually running a platform that can also be leveraged by other software vendors, and we have a good OEM business there. So the frustration came from the fact that basically content, there's some sort of a content explosion that is going on, right? That has been going on for the last 5 years and continue to go on. Because, that is a result of everybody is kind of a knowledge worker these days. Everybody has tools, PCs, mobiles, etc., that allow them to produce content, right? So it just never ends. Content continues to be created at a massively high growth rate, and actually the studies that are being carried out on that market regularly show that over the next 12 months, at any point in time, we will create more content than in the whole history of the humankind. So it's really something which is challenging, right, for companies and governments, because that does affect productivity when you are not managing this content properly. It does affect your bill also from an IT infrastructure cost perspective, because if you look at the results of the storage vendors like NetApp, EMC, etc., over the last 10 years, they've been doing very, very, very well. Because the response so far has been, well, we keep everything, we just put more massive storage, right, capacity. That cannot go on anymore, because first of the cost incurred, by the IT infrastructure, but also because the more content you have, right, the more challenging it becomes to govern that content anyway. So you need to do the triage and categorization before it happens, right, that content starts proliferating everywhere. And then, in response to that growing demand, what did we have? Well, I have to say, I could kind of blame myself and a good chunk of the Fresco management team, because we come from this world, right? So we are a bit like Dark Vador, we come from the dark side of software somehow. Anyway, what we have learned also after 20 years in this industry is that the traditional software model is kind of broken. This is a maturing industry, right? And things need to change. But unless you have an alternative, right? And until you have an alternative anyway, as a company procurement guy or IT manager, you did not have much choice. You were kind of handcuffed with only, right, a traditional software model, and you had to pick and choose from EMC Documentum, OpenText, etc., right? But this industry has been running, right, since early 80s, right? ECM is not a new gimmicks thing, right? ECM has been out there for some time, right? And they have been really playing the traditional software game by the playbook. Very high cost, high complexity, which ended up with lots of shelfware, millions paid in licenses, but only 5% of users really deployed, right? And at the end, tie-in. i.e., locked in, right, with one vendor because the switching costs are so high, right, and there is no alternative because, again, it's closed source, right? So I think now what companies are realizing is that this is enough. This industry is maturing, they need to get their act together, and good news, we now have open source, which then allow us to propose an alternative to this model, although delivering the same broad set of capabilities in the ECM market as far as Fresco is concerned. So open source and Fresco, yes, it's different. What the market wants these days is lower cost, simplicity. There is no reason why software should be systematically overly complex, that you need some sort of an agency, analyst, and then a team of 10 or 20 people working for 6, 9, 12 months on an RFP to determine, is this really the good product? This is no longer necessary, no longer required. And anyway, it's overly complex, time-consuming, and costly process to pick up a product, right? And people want choice. They want the choice to use and leverage their existing tools, existing infrastructure. They don't want to be imposed, but by the way, you have to replace the whole thing by an entirely new stack. You have to upgrade, right? Back to the tie-in. I think Microsoft is just so much of an illustration of that, right? With their SharePoint product in our space, ECM and collaboration, right? They're forcing you, to apply all the new versions of the entire Microsoft stack for SharePoint to run. Is this fair? We dare saying that it is not fair, and actually it is, old-fashioned, right? I mean, it's more like running a cartel than running a business. So how do we do that at Fresco and in open source in general, achieving what seems to be quite challenging, right? Low cost, simplicity, choice, in after all what is, yes, sometimes complex products, at least underneath, but our mission is to make that much simpler to use, but also to deploy, leverage from an IT perspective. So that's where the open source model, comes into play, right? And actually, there are really three fundamental pillars here that allow us to deliver that promise of low cost, simplicity, and choice. First, well, obviously, there are different kind of open source projects. There is a community-driven projects which usually matures over a very long period of time, like Linux, for example, right? Or the Apache Foundation. That is because usually there's not really a professional, dedicated team working on the specific project. It's more a community building progressively and then delivering a very, very efficient, high-performing, right, product. But that may take 5 up to 10 years. And then commercial vendors like Red Hat for Linux or Ubuntu come into play delivering a service, right? But they don't really have invented Linux, okay? And you have other, right, open source models like we have leveraged at Fresco, but also Sugar CRM in the CRM space, or MySQL in the database space have done, is that you then gather an enterprise, a world-class, right, team of professional developers that really know their stuff. They are known worldwide for actually being really the pioneers behind that industry, right? And you assemble them because they do believe that things need to change, right? The market needs something really fresh, and guess what? There is this open source model that allow us now to develop much faster, right? So let's have a go at it. And that is what happened at Fresco with John Newton, who is co-founder and CTO of Fresco, who was actually also co-founder of Documentum before, and was one of the first engineers to work at Ingress back in the 80s. So he's really a well-known guy in the content management, right, space, and certainly, right, a reference. And obviously, he just did not create Fresco alone. He partnered with John Powell, who was CEO of Business Object, but also he assembled, right, a world-class, and we dare saying, if not the best, one of the best Java/ECM software development team in the world, right? From actually Documentum, Vignette, and Interwoven, and also some of the Finite guys. And with this knowledge, 20 years of knowledge in an industry, and then taking a white page, fresh look at what the market needs and how we can leverage existing best of breed, right, open source components to develop a new ECM architecture, you are in a much more powerful situation than trying to do it closed source, right? And we're going to explain that a bit further. Obviously, you need a strong community as well, because you can't just develop everything yourself, right? The strong community aspect comes with actually what I have just mentioned. The higher the pedigree and the quality of what you develop, firsthand, the actually easier it is to develop the community, because it will always use or start actually with a rather technology savvy, right, community. And when they see that this architecture is really spot on, future-proof, very smart, then the community starts building up very, very, very rapidly. And that is what has happened, right, at Fresco. Obviously, all this would just not be possible if internet was not there, right? Open source can exist as a low-touch distribution model also through to the internet, right, paradigm, where actually anybody can access your information, make a download, and start using the product. I mean, just a quick one on the closed versus open, right? Because I think it's worth a bit, digging into this. I mean, the closed source traditional software vendor, right, paradigm is really based on protecting your IP, intellectual property. Everything is built around that, because the paradigm here is that, well, if we have such a good code, nobody else should know about it. And if we have such nasty bugs into a product, nobody else either should know about it, right? So basically, you end up with an organization overly complex, right, that is made entirely for the purpose of hiding, right, and protecting the IP, and having to fund, right, and finance a lot of people around the engineering team explaining how good is their product, etc. Because anyway, nobody can really see it. Nobody can actually touch it. You can only see, right, demos, POCs, etc. before you buy. You can't open up, right, the boot and look at the engine. I mean, that model has worked for about 20 years, but now in an environment where things need to be delivered much faster, expectations are different because, yes, people want more transparency, it's just failing. When you look at the software IT industry anyway, in general, in the ECM space in particular, there's been barely any innovation over the last 10 years. And why is that? It's because this process is so complex that it's just impossible to innovate. Right? It just takes too much time, right, to interact with the market, to see what is a new feature, the need, etc., etc. Right? In the ECM space, there's been basically no innovation from the existing players and leaders over the last 5-6 years. Documentum, for example, was boasting in its latest release web services. I mean, it's kind of a joke, right? I mean, web services, it dates back the late 90s. So it takes you 7 years to put that into your product. Interesting. And then when you look at Microsoft, I mean, personally, right, I think I know pretty well the industry, and I think the only innovation I can remember of Microsoft is probably Visual Basic, because anything else is just copycat of what was invented somewhere else. But they've been extremely good, yes, at leveraging a de facto monopoly, and they were good with Visual Basic because that was helping consumerizing software development. So they did a good job with that back in the 80s. While at the opposite, you have the open source development model where actually you are very open. You don't care about the IP thing. You just take the premises that, well, anyway, right, it's better to make it open so that people can really look into, what they are buying or using, help us, enhance that, right? While anyway, we make the bet that we can monetize that later on through a large community, through support and services, maintenance, right? We can sell, and we will come back to that later. But that allows you to go much, much faster in the development cycle. And also, it is a good insurance for market fitness, right, with your product. Because if there is no community building around your product, you can start questioning, well, maybe there's no market anyway. Nobody's interested. While actually, if you see that there is a fast-growing community, it's because what you are doing is servicing a specific need. and people are helping you concentrating on what really is most important. In that light, I mean, open source has a lot to do with innovation, and that again is one of the maybe most kept secret, right, in the software industry. Back to the traditional vendors not inventing a lot or innovating a lot. Innovation actually has to be taken also from maybe a different angle. It's a bit like the car manufacturing industry. When you compare Toyota with, the big, giant US car companies that are really in trouble these days, I don't think that, Toyota became number one by creating or innovating, providing the market with new from nowhere features. They were innovating through making what was already known much simpler to use, much more accessible from a price point. Innovation has also to do with your capacity to consumerize or help consumerize a product. If you deliver a feature but it is so damn complicated, for an end user to use it, they're not going to use it. But if that same feature, you inject innovation into your software so that it's damn simple, even a 6-year-old kid can use it, that is true innovation. And you need to do that up front for the users, right, at the UI level, so that your product get really consumerized. And we did a lot of innovation there as far as Fresco is concerned, right? We also have leveraged some, let's say, rulings or governance, right? Like, for example, forcing proprietary vendors like Microsoft to open up some of their actually standards and protocols so that we could, right, also make it very easy from Microsoft Office, for example, to interact with Fresco using and leveraging the openness now or the access to the information regarding the SharePoint protocol. You do need to innovate from a UI, user experience, right, perspective, consumerization perspective, but also you need to make sure that your product is much simpler to deploy, integrate with existing infrastructure. And that can only be done, yes, if you really actually take a fresh look at your ECM architecture, and that is what we did at Fresco, right? Because again, we are the only new future-proof, right, ECM platform / architecture that has been brought to the market over the last 5 years. And we have then leveraged in that platform some best-of-breed, open source components like Spring for the Java development framework, like Lucene for the index search engine, like Hibernate for the abstraction of the RDBMS layer. All this that has made actually the platform at Fresco to be much more interoperable, open, and easy to install, deploy, integrate with existing infrastructures, which is a key request and demand from existing customers. And all this, now you have to leverage, again, the internet and the existing infrastructure out there that allow people to discover your product without you getting involved, which is then really also the power of open source, that, we don't, push people that you should try, you should do this, you should do that. We let them discover themselves the product, what we do, what they can get from us beyond the product, i.e. services, etc. And then they can discover and make their own judgment, assessment as to whether this product is a good fit for them. There's no need for us to come up with, never finishing, ending slide deck explaining what our product does. It's out there. They can download it. They can have access to the source code, right? So we can't cheat, basically, right? So they try it, and if they think that, hey, this is good stuff, right, I like it, it is their choice to decide whether they are willing to contact us so that we can provide support service, or they do that on their own, right? And then they have to fund it also anyway, somehow, whether through their internal staff or contracting some people to support, actually, right, the maintenance and deployment of Fresco within their organization. Because at the end of the day, we need to make money still, right? All this is good and great, actually, but yes, we also need to find a business model that allow, right, our Fresco staff to be paid and to do their work, from engineering to actually supporting existing customers, right? So we do that. Here we have not reinvented the wheel. We have just leveraged existing models from Red Hat, MySQL and the likes dual licensing, and what we do is that we provide support services, which you can see as some sort of an insurance, because there is no such thing as professional enterprise class support free of charge. There are sometimes hidden costs. People, actually use their own staff to do things, right? Or they contract people out there. But when it comes to running a sophisticated platform, right, that is business mission critical for you, you cannot reasonably rely on a community support with no SLA. You need to have some sort of an insurance. But again, it is your choice whether you do that with us, and we do pretend that we can deliver the best TCO in that respect, right? That's our job, and there is no lock-in. If people are not satisfied with the service, anyway, they can go back to the community labs version and get supported through other channels. So it is also a good way to balance the relationship between us as a vendor here and customers, that they are much more in control of, right, the situation compared to what is the case with traditional software vendors where there is no alternative. And maybe just to wrap up and finish, I'd like to highlight the fact that, again, we are in tough economic times, and also we are facing tough, experienced, seasoned sales teams within the competition, right? We should never, as an open source players, actors, ourselves and our peers, underestimate the power of the competition when it comes to, convincing their customers that, but maybe it's too risky, what we call the FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt about open source. The thing is, open source basically is not just mission critical, it is web mission critical, right? And it is powering some of the most mission critical and large systems in the world, right? Look at Google, what they've done. It's not through proprietary software, software that they have achieved what they have achieved. It's leveraging open source. But here I have a few examples, like Adobe, which is using Fresco for their acrobat.com site. There's about 30,000 new users registered every day, right? 12 terabytes of documents stored in the Fresco content platform, which is being pushed to the web every day. And we have other, right, big names here that are really deploying Fresco in big way, right? 10, 15, 50,000, right, users for some of them, and really in mission critical, right, business applications that they rely on Fresco and our support services, right, to make work. Maybe a last word on Fresco in Switzerland, right? We do have some customers here, right? And I thank you them all. I don't know whether actually there are some Fresco customers around, but and we have also a good bunch of partners that can help actually prospects and customers delivering and implementing Fresco projects. So as a conclusion, I think we are now, yes, in a situation where it's either, lower cost, simpler, more innovation, smart, right, car against, the big US giant, right, old-fashioned cars, and I'll let you guess who's winning these days. With that, thank you very much, and I'm available for any questions if you have some.
Thank you, Mr. Dorval. We now have a couple of minutes for questions. Yep.
Well, you showed us that it scaled very well to the high level, a lot of documents and a lot of people. How does it scale down if you have a very small content management right now, a small company with 10 people and they want to? Yeah. Is it the right solution, or would it be overkill?
Well, we do have, first, there are customers and users, right? Users are the people that use Fresco Labs, they're happy with that, and they don't deal with us directly, right? We don't deliver support services, and there are a lot of small companies leveraging the Fresco Labs, right, version. We also have mid-sized small companies that have very specific content management needs. For them, we actually are delivering something which was just too expensive, out of their reach, right? Before we arrive on the market, because the equivalent features they were looking for were accessible only at a price tag they could not afford. But they are ready to invest because content management is really a big thing for them. And now with at Fresco, they can, right? Although they have to pay, yes, 20, 30K euros a year, right? I mean, to do a project, et cetera, et cetera. Our feedback here is that usually the very low segment of the market is consuming open source, which is good. They're not paying for it. You see what I mean? But that's fair enough. It's also very much a channel, right? Issue when those small companies they see every day an HP vendor, a Microsoft vendor, an IBM vendor, etc. Right? And we rely on our friends at Ubuntu and Red Hat maybe to create this situation, in the future, right? But yes, there are small installations, small customers with just 20 users, but they want actually a powerful, right, good platform to manage, let's say, very important content-rich, right, documents.